The moment they opened it, nothing happened. No explosion, no warning, no visible danger, just silence. And that was exactly what made it so dangerous. Because inside that small container was something nobody in that room could see, something nobody could smell, something nobody could feel. Until the officials contacted specialists, people trained to deal with unusual hazards. And soon, a nuclear physicist was called. When he arrived, he simply took out his radiation detector, turned it on, and slowly approached the object. At first, silence. Then suddenly, the device reacted, fast, violently, the sound rising, the readings climbing, far beyond safe limits. And in that moment, he understood exactly what they were facing. This wasn't just dangerous, this was radioactive contamination. Further analysis would confirm something disturbing. The material was radioactive, highly radioactive. And then came the confirmation. What they were seeing was something most doctors never encounter in their entire careers. It was cesium-137, a radioactive substance used in cancer treatment. But the most disturbing discovery was still coming. Because the real question was no longer, what is this material? The real question was, how was something this dangerous left forgotten inside an abandoned building? And that answer would reveal the invisible detail that started everything. And this is where the situation became irreversible. The moment cesium-137 was identified, everything changed. Authorities immediately realized this was not just a local incident. This was a national emergency. Police isolated the scrapyard. The sanitary surveillance building was sealed. Houses connected to the material were evacuated. Entire streets were blocked. Radiation warning signs appeared where normal life had existed just days before, and the small container that had started everything was carefully sealed in concrete to stop further exposure. But by then, the invisible damage had already spread. But by now, some families already knew they were going to lose someone. Emergency teams began tracking contamination. Every person connected to the object had to be located, tested, measured, isolated if necessary. People who had touched the material were separated from their own families, not because they had done something wrong, but because they had unknowingly become part of the disaster. And then came the moment that showed the true scale. Some people would soon discover their lives had permanently changed. Thousands of residents were told to report for radiation screening. What they were about to discover would shock the entire country. A football stadium became a radiation triage center. Families arrived afraid, confused, not knowing what the machines would reveal. Parents holding children, doctors holding detectors, lines forming, hour after hour. More than 100,000 people would eventually be examined. Imagine an entire city standing in line, waiting to find out if they were contaminated. Many were cleared, hundreds were not. And for those people, life would divide into before and after. Doctors now faced an impossible reality. There were too many patients, too much radiation exposure, and not enough proven treatments. They had to decide who needed help first. Knowing some wouldn't survive, doctors were now facing something medicine rarely sees: large-scale civilian radiation exposure, something that almost never happens outside nuclear disasters. And there was another problem. There were no ready protocols for something like this, not at this scale, not in a city, not involving so many civilians. So doctors did something extraordinary. They didn't just follow medical protocols, they were forced to invent them. In real time, new treatments were tested, new procedures created, new medication strategies adapted. Some patients had even ingested radioactive material, which made treatment even more complex. And many of the emergency treatment protocols developed during goiania are still referenced in radiological medicine today. And by this point, The disaster had already become international news. Soon, international experts arrived, including specialists connected to radiation disasters like Chernobyl, scientists, medical experts, radiation safety teams, people who had seen nuclear catastrophe before. They helped Brazilian teams contain the crisis, share knowledge, improve treatment, because what was happening in Goiania had never happened quite like this before, and the world was learning from it. But outside hospitals, another problem was growing: fear. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some people became afraid of survivors, afraid of families connected to the accident, afraid of contamination they didn't understand. And when some victims were buried in sealed lead coffins for safety, fear turned into anger. Some funerals were met with protests, some even with violence, because panic can make people forget compassion, and radiation is something most people fear without understanding. Even after the radiation was contained, the consequences were only beginning, because stopping the spread was only part of the problem. The cleanup operation became massive. Contaminated homes had to be demolished, soil removed, objects destroyed, personal belongings turned into radioactive waste, entire pieces of people's lives lost forever. And the radioactive waste still exists today, stored in secure facilities, monitored constantly, because some consequences of this disaster will last for generations. But when investigators finally understood the full timeline, they realized something unsettling. This disaster should never have happened, and what investigators found was not a technical failure. It was a human one, not because radiation is rare, but because control failures are preventable. And that led to the most important question. Not, how did radiation spread? But why was it there at all? Years before 1987, the abandoned building had housed a radiotherapy clinic. The cesium source was part of a treatment machine. When the clinic moved locations, the machine was left behind. Legal disputes delayed action. Ownership became unclear. Responsibility became unclear. Removal became expensive. And so the decision was postponed. Again and again and again, until eventually, nothing was done. The disaster didn't start when the capsule was opened. It didn't start when the powder was touched. It started years earlier, when responsibility became invisible, when everyone assumed someone else would solve the problem, when cost mattered more than risk, when delay felt easier than action. And that is how the most dangerous chain reaction began, not with radiation, but with neglect. In the end, it wasn't just an object that was forgotten, it was responsibility. Because the truth is, most disasters don't begin with dramatic moments. They begin quietly, with small decisions, ignored warnings, delayed responsibilities, things people assume are not urgent, until they are. And what makes this story terrifying is that nothing about it was impossible, because somewhere right now, another forgotten detail is waiting. If you enjoy stories like this, stories that reveal how one small detail can start a domino effect that changes everything, subscribe and follow the details, because the next story might be even more unbelievable. In history, the world doesn't change only because of big decisions. Sometimes, one overlooked detail changes everything.